Well, indeed, you cannot miss us, can you? Yes, we're looking at another matter now. And if you plan on voting during the Bayelsa and Kogi elections, which will take place on November the 16th, you better be watching this one. Because we have with us here Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi, who is the Director of Voter Education and Publicity at the Independent National Electoral Commission. It's good to see you again.
To be here. Thank you. Good morning.
After the 2019 election frenzy.
Well, yeah. We're in the post-election period now.
Well, another one is coming up.
Another one is coming.
And it will seem it's another test because you have been doing quite a bit of review since the 2019 elections were ended, debriefing members of staff, knowing what went wrong. Well, matters are still in court. That one is another kettle of fish. But,
yes,
you know, at least as a commission, seeing what it is that you can write as the next elections approach, or perhaps new innovations you want to try.
Correct.
What would you be telling Nigerians that they should be looking out for in the 2019, in this off-season election, which we're saying in November?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Good morning. It's stock-taking time. Actually, we've almost concluded in that regards. There are several approaches to it, one of which is the debriefing you referred to. We talked to all our electoral officers around the country. We talked to our commissioners. We talked to stakeholders. And it is debriefing and it's also consultative. What went wrong, but also what went right. Those things that went right, we can see how we can improve on those things. And the things that did not go so well, what happened? Why did they not go as planned? And what can be done against future elections? And yes, all off-cycle elections are opportunities to test run new processes, to implement the recommendations from the reviews. And those are the kind of things we will do. Certain things you can do, certain things you cannot. Obviously, things that require electoral or constitutional reform, there isn't much you can do that until the laws are changed. But without sitting down waiting for the laws to be changed, you must do some level of advocacy. You must engage with not only the legislatures, but also the executive and also stakeholders, political parties. A lot of times people say, oh, we don't like this, we don't like that, the law should change. But we have to be careful in changing the law such that you're not creating new challenges, which might be as bad or worse than the ones you're trying to address. And that, unfortunately, seems to be what we have encountered in the electoral process over the years with all the reforms that have been done. You take one from this side, but you must balance with something else from the other side. You
know, when you said what went right, I remember a former boss of mine whom I used to have, and after, you know, programs, he would say, let's talk about what went right before we talk about what went wrong.
Yes.
Because people will be more willing to talk about what went wrong if they're also, you know, being spoken to about what they did right. So can you tell us then some of the things that in INEC's perspective and from some of the discussions they've had with their people, with your people, what they think went right with these elections?
Well, when you strip the elections, strip away things that are not absolutely within the control, strip away security, for example, security challenges, security issues, I think quite a number of those elections were fairly good elections. When the dust settles, you'll come to see that these processes were not bad in themselves. You know, they could have been disrupted by external forces, other things. So when you take away all those things, you'll find out that many of those elections, the fact, when you look at the conclusions, the fact, for example, that in some states where changes, incumbents were defeated, for some people that's a positive. It just shows that even with the powers of incumbency, the will of the people can still prevail. Let
me take you up on one major change INEC made in this 2019 elections, which, you know, a lot of political parties had raised issue with. Yeah. They were not comfortable with this simultaneous accreditation and voting, which INEC had come back to, saying that they believed it would save time, that in previous elections they noticed that it was time wasting, and that it was saying that you had developed the technology, or you were now at a place where you were comfortable to conduct both an accreditation and a voting at the same time. Did that really work in these elections? Because some people will say perhaps that was the basis of some of the fraud that we saw.
Yeah, thank you. I think you have a good grasp of what it really was. People tend to forget that we started off, our election started from what you call simultaneous accreditation and voting. That's where we started off from. But when we saw abuses, when we saw that people had so many cars because our voters registration was not biometric. It was not electronic. It was not biometric. So you could afford to register in so many different places. Some people had 200, 300 cards. And they could also go from one station to another and be disruptive. After casting their votes, they go to another station, vote, or disrupt other things. So with the advent of the electronic and biometric register of voters, that became a lot more difficult, almost impossible. So, yes, you're right. We were now confident enough and said, look, you can do both at the same time. It will not be disruptive. And by and large, it succeeded. And it arose from our analysis and a review of previous elections, 2011, 2015, and the off-cycle elections. Then we said, look, let us try this with the off-cycle elections. Starting from Bayelsa, the rerun election in Bayelsa of that December. So when we looked at it, it worked. And I think that is one of the positives that we took from there. Some parties were against it, but they're not the majority of political parties, actually. And that did not come.
If you had a majority of political parties opposing it, would you have dropped the idea?
No, we're a regulatory body as well. So we should do what we think is best. We're obliged, not by law, but we just feel obliged to consult. But when we consult, we also reason it out. This is what some people are saying. This is what others are saying. What do we think is the best course of action to take? So that is what a regulatory body does. It regulates. The people being regulated don't like it. Generally, we don't like regulations. But when you look at it from the overall benefit of the process of the system, you find out that this is what is good for the system. We'll try it out. If it doesn't work, then we'll go back to the drawing boards and see whether we can modify it. But in this particular case, nobody, absolutely nobody after that, the elections, even when we consulted the political parties, none of them complained about that simultaneous voting and accreditation. None of them did.
You talked about laws changing. What laws are you looking to change before the Kogi and Bayelsa elections?
Well, it's 2 months, and you know the process of lawmaking does take time. But from the reports of the observers, from the observations, from the consultative meetings, there's a desire for some reform of the legal framework. And that includes the Constitution, it includes the Electoral Act, which is the regulatory law for the process. Constitutionally, it takes a long process before you can amend the Constitution. So I don't envisage that will be done before in the next 2 months. I don't see that. The Electoral Act, I know the process has started, but it's still in its formative elementary stages. So I doubt if in the next 7, 8 weeks the law can be changed. But some parts of the regulation that we operate, that we can change because it gives us flexibility. Some of those things we might have to look at and see whether they can be changed before November 16th.
This is general.
Yes.
What specifically?
In the law, okay, let me take the laws for example.
Let us
look the Zamfara case about sponsorship of candidates. The Supreme Court, we believe, has settled that, but I know some parties will still try it out. But the Supreme Court has settled that. So you must conduct primaries. Conduct primaries in line with Section 87 of the Electoral Act. One of the parts of that creates some ambiguity is the fact that INEC cannot, will have to accept any candidate brought forward by the political parties, whether they pass through the process or not. So it has to be litigation that will solve it. Now, if we had passed, say, no, we cannot accept you because there's a proviso in Section 31 that says, look, take the list submitted by the parties regardless, notwithstanding any defects. And we think, for example, that part of the law ought to go. We believe, for example, there's a connection between electoral offenders, apprehending these people, prosecuting them, Electoral Offences Commission or some other law enforcement agency has to be charged with that responsibility. Some people argue that we have too many agencies and commissions already, so we don't need another Electoral Offences Commission. But I think there's a unanimity in thinking that you do need to punish offenders. If you don't punish offenders, then there'll be no deterrence. INEC can prosecute, but INEC does not arrest, INEC does not investigate. So other agencies have to do that. But why don't you get one agency, everything under one roof, where you have powers to arrest, powers to investigate, powers to prosecute, and make it independent. Independent in the sense that it's not subject to political control of the ruling party or any politician, that kind of a thing, fairly independent. So those are some of the things that will probably take a long while for us. But don't forget that a case like that, we've had bills in the past. I think both the Non-Money Committee most recently drafted a bill for the establishment of electoral offences and the Political Party Registration Commission. So you'll have two roles to play, so that in between elections it's not idle. So because that's one of the arguments against having an electoral offences commission, that in between general elections, what would they be doing? But the Non-Money Committee, in its wisdom, said, look, let us give it additional responsibilities. Some have argued I should go under EFCC, but some say, oh, EFCC may be politically influenced. I don't know. So these are some of the arguments. But whatever it is Nigerians want, we'll make it known to the National Assembly, and we hope that a body is charged with that responsibility.
You just raised another big headache.
Yes.
I mean, you had 91 parties.
92.
92?
Yes, since in the 91 partook in the elections, but Booth Political Party, I think it is, was registered by court order as the 92nd party.
Interesting. I think you had about 71 or 72.
73
for the presidential candidates.
Yes.
How do you think that is going to affect the conduct of the 2019 Bayelsa and Kogi elections? Because there are fears that these parties still exist. People are saying, prune down these parties. There must be conditions for which that parties must meet to continue to remain political parties, that we have an unwieldy ballot paper which could confuse the electorate at the end of the day. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, we try not to get too involved in the issue of registration, deregistration of parties. But there is a constitutional provision now, by the way, for deregistration. It's a bit nebulous. There's some uncertainty about it, interpretation of those sections. There hasn't been any judicial pronouncement on it, but we're examining it. If it gives us powers, we'll do what has to be done. It was in the Electoral Act, one of the amendments of the Electoral Act 2010, but it was challenged successfully by some political parties because it's the Constitution that spells out conditions for registration, and it should be the Constitution that spells out conditions for deregistration. But be that as it may, there are two major schools of thought that I know of in this regard. One is that, look, let them exist. Let the parties flourish. In democracy, let the sky is wide enough for all the birds to fly. But constrain those access to the ballots. While so many parties, because and examples are given of neighboring countries, not even abroad, but neighboring countries of just Republic of Benin, which is much smaller than us, has more political parties. Niger, Chad, those have a lot more parties. But there are conditions for access to the ballot. In which case, yes, you're a registered political party, but for example, you must have, for any candidates of yours to be on the ballot, he must have 10 registered voters in each ward or in each particular unit signing, nominating you. Apart from being sponsored by the political party, you must have some kind of nomination. And it used to be in some of our electoral decrees prior to now. So nomination is a process, or get a threshold. In the UK, for example, you pay a certain amount of money to show you're serious, so that if you don't get a certain threshold, you lose that deposit. That's why a person loses his deposit in an election. There are different approaches that one can take, but probably the most preferred one is that you should get a number of people nominating you. That's not necessarily party members, but might be registered voters. They have to prove that they are registered, and might be, for a presidential candidate, for example, you might say 1,000 people or 10,000 people in each state or in each local government, something like that. So that, but there should be a threshold for access to ballots, even though you are a registered political party. Some argue it should be independent candidacy, and some other, but there must be threshold issues you must cross before you get on the ballot. That is a way of taking only the most serious people, so you don't have an election where some people score 1,000, a presidential candidate scores 1,000 votes right around the whole 36 states and the FCT, whereas some other people are scoring millions of votes. It's just a huge discrepancy. The people who argue that say, look, political parties, and that is true, political parties are organic. I may start small, but I can grow. The Labour Party in the UK today, for example, 100 years ago, more or less, did not exist. It only came to power in after Second World War, 1945 or 46. So, but it grew and grew. The Liberal Party, or the Whigs, were the main opposition to the Conservative Party. But over the years, things have been organic. They've grown. Some parties have, the fortunes of some parties have dwindled.
Yeah, but some people will say that perhaps we should have parties at the grassroots. So indeed, you know, there will be that school of thought. The threshold thing might be, you know, perhaps the best way to go. But, you know, I think the question will now be, how do we then define the threshold? Should we be looking at least maybe winning councillorship seats at least, or local government seats, or something at that level, or state assembly seats? Why is it that most of the parties seem to be gunning for the presidency without even having, it would seem, a base at the grassroots? Is this something that you're looking at?
Well, speaking as an individual, and this is not, I'm not aware the Commission has a policy on it or has thought about it. Let me put things in context. In the First Republic, we did have what you might term grassroots political parties, regional parties, smaller parties. People tend to forget that. But you see, right from 1979, but more so in 1999, for you to get registered as a political party, you must have representatives from 2/3 of the states of the country. So your executive committee must have members from 24, 25 states minimum. So the constitution envisages national parties. And that's the argument of some others. Look, let parties grow. Let parties be. If I want to form a party in my village or in my local government, let it be so. But the framers of our constitution seem to have thought that, look, there's a mischief. You had small political parties with tendencies that we don't like. We want things, more cohesive political parties that look, membership is open to all Nigerians. That's part of the stipulations in the constitution. Membership is open to all Nigerians. So you cannot form a party with only Christians, with only Muslims, with only people from a particular segment. So, yes, but part of the conditions for deregistration of political parties is that you do not win a seat presently in the constitution. So the constitution envisages that, yes, you should be able to win a seat or get a sizable portion of votes. I think it's 25% or something like that in one local government, in one state, for example, for the presidential election. And it's the way things are. We tend to focus a lot more in the center. Maybe the center is too powerful. We tend to focus more on presidential elections. And if you ask many people now, they will not know who their councillor is or who their representative in the state assembly is. But the focus is they know the governor, they know the president.
We will take a break at this moment. We will come back and we'll be asking what should those who are going to be voting in the elections come November 16, what should they be looking out for? In just a moment, please stay with us. Mr. Oluwale Osaze Uzi is still with us in the studio. He's the Director of Virtual Education and Publicity at INEC. And we're talking about innovations that we should be seeing or we could be seeing come November 16 in both Kogi and Bayelsa. What should we be looking out for?
Well, quite honestly, I'm not aware that there will be any fundamental changes into the process. We've generally stuck with the guidelines are still basically the same. We've stuck with the simultaneous accreditation and voting. And as the Act still stands, we will still transmit results as required by the Electoral Act, which is just from polling units to collation center to each level of collation up to the governorship election, because that's what the law still says. If it changes before that time, then we'll look at that. We've rejigged our logistics delivery. Lots of things that we can do locally, and within we will do those things locally. We've revamped the registration area camps. These are the places, the staging posts.
Racks, right?
The racks, yes. These are the staging posts from which we will deploy materials on election day. And timelines have been set and will be more to ensure materials get to where they're supposed to get to at any given time. So days before the election, all materials, weeks actually, a couple of elections, all materials will be on ground. And because that was a major issue in the 2019 elections.
Quickly tell us about this controversy which has been brewing over the sacking of the Cross River Residents Electoral Commissioner, Mr. Franklin Breer. He says that the commission cannot sack him, that he resigned when he decided he was going to go into partisan politics. Yes. What exactly is the position of the commission?
Well, the position never used that it sacked him. Quite honestly, I think I've been on other platform channels as well, where the commission does not sack its national commissions. It cannot sack its chairman, it cannot sack recs. It can sack its staff because it employs its staff. But the Resident Electoral Commission is appointed by the president. But he did indicate that he has resigned. But until we receive that letter, until the appointing authority receives that letter, he is not deemed to have resigned. What we did is, pending when that is done, all the powers delegated to the rec have been withdrawn from him. So he cannot function, he's not functioning as rec. He says he has resigned, that may be so. But it can only take effect by virtue of the provision of the Constitution. I think it's Section 308. It can only take effect upon receipt by the appointing authority. If he has written a letter through us to the president, then we'll say, okay, fine. We are aware of it and we've sent it to the president. This is the acknowledgement copy, so it has taken effect. Until that is done, it hasn't taken effect. But in the meantime, he cannot act as Resident Electoral Commissioner.
So he has to send his letter to the president, who in turn will inform the commission. Is that the process? Or?
Well, the process, the Constitution says, it takes effect. You can resign, fair enough, but it takes effect upon the receipt by the appointing authority. In this case, it's the president. So it can only take effect when it is received by the president. As at today, I don't know whether the president has received that letter. If he receives it today, then it takes effect from today.
So the president, when he receives it, will have to let the commission know, right?
Well, the ideal thing will be he routes it through us, or he notifies us, or copies us with that. That would be the ideal thing. So
the commission wasn't copied?
Well, we haven't received any formal communication from Dr. Breer, no.
It's a fine place to leave it. I guess we will be talking to you a lot more in the coming days, especially as elections get closer and perhaps even after primaries have been conducted by the political parties involved. But we thank you for coming on this morning. Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi is Director of Voter Education and Publicity at the Independent National Electoral Commission. Well, that's where we leave Friday's edition of Sunrise Daily. We hope that you've had a good time with us this morning. Thank you for sending your comments and your messages as well. And Maupe Ugun Yusuf.
Yeah, how could we forget it's Friday? Well, yes, indeed. What a week it's been as well. Thank you all for watching. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
I am Kayode Okikele.
I am Akide. Have a wonderful weekend.
And opinions expressed by guests on this program are those of the maker and do not reflect the views, opinions, and endorsement of Channels Television.